Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the 2020 Promise Zone Federal Convening last session of the Federal Convening. Today, we will be with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Topic will be reentry and prevention. We will get started here in about 4 minutes. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Promise Zone Federal Convening. This is our last session of our Federal Convening, and we have U.S. Attorney's Office, which will be discussing reentry and prevention today. We'll get started here in about 3 minutes. We want to come back in really quickly and welcome everybody to the 2020 Promise Zone Federal Convening. We're going to get started here in approximately 1 minute. We would like to welcome everybody that's in. We have been taking the opportunity to use the chat format to let us know where you're coming from. We have various people from different states, so if you want to let us know where you're coming from in our chat, please do so. All right, everyone, we want to welcome you to the Federal Convening 2020 Promise Zones. We are here today with our last session of our Federal Convening. U.S. Attorney's Office will be presenting on reentry and prevention. Want to go over some quick house rules really quick. We want to discuss really quickly about staying on mute. Please keep your computers on mute during the whole presentation. We are using the chat format for all questions. We have individuals, our moderator, as well as myself and others watching those watching the chat to answer your questions. There will be an opportunity during this presentation where we will address all those questions presented. So anytime during the presentation, please feel free to type a question. We will try our best to make sure that it gets answered. If not, we will make sure that we send that appropriate question to the individual that it's directed towards and get you an answer after the presentation. But we do request that you keep your computers on mute during the whole presentation as we go through this session. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator. Michael Huff, it's on you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Silas. And welcome to everyone who's joined us. And I know we'll continue to have people joining us. This is the final session of the 2020 National Coalition of Promise Zones. And what we've tried to do with this is actually give a comprehensive kind of set of tools and resources for the Promise Zones to utilize, because the Promise Zones are national across the country, and they have partners from every sector. And so one of the pieces that we need to round up with is actually the reentry portion and how the resources kind of work for that, and how the Promise Zones can kind of be aware of what's there. And we have a treat today. We actually have representatives from the U.S. Attorney's Office who will be giving us some information and covering the reentry portion, which, especially now, due to the COVID situation and other issues, we need to make sure we have the entire community included within this process. So let me start out with the introductions. Our initial presenter will be the actual U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of California. And he is a California native. His name is McGregor Scott. And Mr. Scott has actually served his first term as attorney in the attorney's office from 2003 to 2009. And then he transitioned and worked in a law firm. He joined the law firm Orrick, Harrington, and Sutcliffe as a partner. He was focusing on white-collar criminal defense and corporate investigations. In addition, Mr. Scott retired in 2008 from the U.S. Army Reserve as a lieutenant colonel after 23 years of service. Recently, in 2017, he returned for a second term as the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of California. And today, it has 97 congressionally authorized attorney positions and offices in Sacramento, Fresno, and Bakersfield. And I have interacted with U.S. Attorney Scott in Sacramento. Mr. Scott is focused on environmental devastation caused by cartel marijuana grows in our national forests, keeping guns out of hands of violent criminals, human trafficking, and that issue continues to be highlighted, and working with community leaders to establish federal halfway houses in Sacramento. That's something that is still a necessity, as housing is at the top of the needs. Mr. Scott received his BA from Santa Clara University and his JD from Hastings College of Law. Additionally, joining us will be Jennifer White, sorry. I've worked with Jennifer as well in Sacramento on some programs related to the reentry. Jennifer is the Reentry and Prevention Outreach Coordinator for the Eastern District of California, and she's also in the U.S. Attorney's Office. She's been located for 4 years actually, in Fresno. That's her base. Prior to her position with the U.S. Attorney's Office, she was working for 13 years inside a Federal Bureau of Prisons penitentiary. So she has some experience and a wealth of knowledge that's beneficial. Jennifer has a bachelor's degree in social work and a master's degree in school counseling, and she maintains a credential as a global career development facilitator. So you've got the team together. You got a dream team here who can share this information. And now I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to U.S. Attorney Scott to get us started.
Well, Michael, thank you very much. And I'll say good morning from the Pacific time zone here in Sacramento this morning. And Michael, when you said Jennifer Scott, that's my wife's name. So I thought, uh-oh, how did my wife get into this program? So thank you very much for having us. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to speak with all of you on a very, very important issue. I want to orient you very briefly to the Eastern District. As Michael mentioned, we are headquartered in Sacramento, the state's capital. We have a large branch office in Fresno and then a satellite office in Bakersfield. We cover 34 of the 58 counties in California. If you think of the Great Central Valley of California extending from the Oregon border to the North Los Angeles County line, and then over to the Sierra Nevada mountain counties on the Nevada border, that is the Eastern District. We serve a population of approximately 8 million people. Our predominant urban centers are Sacramento, Fresno, and Bakersfield. The issues that we wrestle with in the U.S. Attorney's Office from a criminal justice perspective are really major trafficking of drugs brought in from Mexico. We have the major highway north-south of I-5 and the major highway of I-80 east-west. We are what we call the transit district, so we deal with that mightily. We also have very significant gang problems up and down the valley. So that's really a nutshell of who we are and what the issues are that we deal with. With respect to the topic today, I want to really be very candid with you. I started my career as a deputy district attorney in Contra Costa County in the San Francisco Bay Area. I then was an elected district attorney in a county in the north part of the state, and then went directly to my first tenure as the United States Attorney here in the Bush 43 administration. So the first 20 years of my career I spent as a prosecutor, then a stint in private practice, and now back as the U.S. Attorney. I think I have a well-earned reputation as a conservative prosecutor who believes that people should be held accountable for what they have chosen to do. Now, I have come to have a better perspective on how things should work after they have been held accountable for what they have done. And that is why in our office, we are fully supportive of reentry courts and other models that can help people to develop life skills, get the basics in place like a GED and a driver's license and all the things that are essential to functioning in our society. And Jennifer, in just a moment, is going to talk to you in more detail about the nuts and bolts of how we support this effort here in the Eastern District of California. On the residential reentry centers, I think that some of you are probably old enough on this call to be familiar with the phrase Nixon goes to China. And to a certain extent, this has been my issue. Nixon goes to China. Scott supports a reentry center because it really, when I was doing this job as a line deputy DA and elected DA, really my first tenure as U.S. Attorney, that was not how we looked at things. That was somebody else's job. That was somebody else's responsibility. But those days are over. And quite candidly, I'm on the back end of my career as a prosecutor, and I'm tired of having to prosecute the same people over and over and over again. And I feel fully obligated in this position to try to do all we can to help people break the cycle, to end the cycle, because that's the only way that we're going to get past these issues that we're wrestling with in so many different ways. So we, in a very, very brief format, a residential reentry center is a Bureau of Prisons funded facility in which they let a contract to a vendor to operate a housing facility in a particular, typically metropolitan area. Sacramento would be an example in our part of the world. And lots of services are centered at that housing facility so that when people come out of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, they have a place to live, which all too often they don't in our part of the world. And then they have concentrated services that can be provided to them for that, to help them to break that cycle. For a host of reasons, we have not had an RRC here in Sacramento for decades. And when I came back in as U.S. Attorney at the end of 2017, this was an issue that I looked into, and I chose to put the full weight of our office behind. And we reached out to HUD and Michael and his crew to help us try to bring people together to try to find a way to get an RRC cited here in Sacramento. And on the back end of the talk, I will spend a little more time talking about what we did to try to make that happen, to try to build coalitions, to try to overcome the not in my backyard syndrome, which is all too prevalent when we talk about the siting of a place for parolees to live. So I will save that for the back end. What I can tell you on the front end is that the Bureau of Prisons, in large measure because of the First Step Act, which passed the Congress and was signed into law by the president in December of 2018, the Bureau of Prisons has a mandate to cite, fund, and support RRCs, and they've been given a mountain of money to make it happen. So there is a desire and an ability to fund at the Bureau of Prisons today that had not previously existed to the First Step Act. And so that's part of what we're trying to take advantage of here in Sacramento. Now, I do want to turn it over to Jennifer at this point to really go into the nuts and bolts of the various specialty courts, the reentry centers, and those types of things. And then I'll close out with a few comments about how to try to get something like this done in your community, and we'll be happy to take your questions. So thank you very much. Jennifer?
Hi, I'm Jennifer White, Reentry and Prevention Outreach Coordinator with the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of California. I'm excited to be here because reentry, which is individuals coming out of prison and reintegrating or reentering our communities, is important to all of us. And all of you are people who can affect change. As you heard in my bio, I have 13 years of lived experience in the Federal Bureau of Prisons. I was in a high security men's penitentiary where I did some time as a case manager. I had over 100 inmates on my caseload, and we would meet one-on-one to discuss short and long-term goals, security classification, transfers to other institutions, and release plans, including halfway house paperwork. I decided to get a master's degree in school counseling, which opened the door for me to become an education specialist in the prison. I loved teaching GED, vocational classes, English as a second language, and parenting classes. I always say that when I was a case manager, inmates were just numbers, like, give me your register number so I can fill out this form. And when I was a teacher, inmates became names, like, put your name on this math homework. It wasn't until I entered the field of reentry that inmates became people who would be leaving prison and entering our communities and becoming our neighbors. So in 2011, I became the first Reentry Affairs Coordinator inside the prison. And now I can see the real struggles that people face when they come out of prison. And I can also see the real resources that are in our community. So today I'd like to talk about specialty courts, other resources like probation and reentry collaboratives, and the Sacramento Promise Zone and residential reentry centers. And finish up with prevention and outreach. Like all of us, individuals who have been locked in prisons have needs. When they come out, they need a place to sleep. They need something to eat, money, clothing, and transportation to whichever city they're going to, whether they call it home or they're going back to their sentencing district. Hopefully, there's a loved one waiting for them to help them with those needs. But what if there isn't? What resources are available to meet those needs? I'd like to mention a few resources that I'm directly involved with, and then a few more that you may or may not know of. But first, let me explain that when a person finishes their prison sentence, they begin their probation time. It's through the probation officer that we're able to identify the people coming out of prison who need resources. One of these resources is through specialty courts. Specialty courts are throughout the nation, federal and state, and they've been proving through research that they're best practice. They're also known as problem-solving courts and typically focus on specific issues like a drug court or gang court or mental health court. In our district, we have several courts to include reentry courts, Better Choices, Veterans Court, and Wellness Court. Our reentry courts are located in Sacramento, Fresno, and Bakersfield. This court is for individuals who have completed their prison sentence and they're currently on federal probation. Each month, the participants appear before a reentry court team, and this team is made up of the judge, the assistant United States attorney, the assistant federal defender, the federal probation office social worker, the federal probation officer, myself, and the treatment provider or the counselor. In Fresno, the reentry court began around 2014 with just 2 participants, and over the years has had approximately 15 graduations with only 13 unsuccessful. We currently have 4 participants with several more that right now are pending graduation. The Bakersfield Reentry Court began in March 2015 and has had 7 graduations. Due to the COVID-19 shelter in place and some other circumstances, there are currently no active participants, but hopefully this will change soon. Our Sacramento Reentry Court was established in 2013 and currently has 4 participants. Over the past year, there's been 3 graduations. The small amount of participants has allowed our reentry court teams to provide each participant with a thorough amount of attentiveness and wraparound services. The goal of these court sessions is for the participants to identify and set goals for themselves that help them achieve getting their needs met, which could be goals like finding housing, obtaining a job, going back to school, developing a hobby, participating in pro-social activities, and maintaining sobriety. The reentry court provides accountability for achieving these goals, and the reentry court team will even provide help for achieving these goals. Upon successful completion of a year in the reentry court, the incentive of having a year of probation subtracted from their sentence is granted. But perhaps one of the greatest accomplishments of the specialty court is the completion and the graduation from the program, because the participant is able to come full circle from a most likely sad and depressing time in the courthouse with family viewing their sentencing to prison, to now being finished with prison and having achieved success, meeting their own needs legally as a productive citizen, and sharing those accomplishments with family in the courthouse, celebrating a graduation, usually with a delicious dessert. I'd also like to mention Wellness Court in Fresno. This court began in December 2019 with 1 participant, and we currently still have 1 participant, but not the same participant. These participants in Wellness Court have serious mental illness and difficulty with life skills. There's no incentive of time off the probation sentence Rather, the focus is completely on providing extra support and services for the participant. The Wellness Court team includes the same team as Reentry Court, but with added amazing partners to include the Fresno Behavioral Health and several other individuals who contract with federal probation and provide programming and individual therapy. Unlike the other specialty courts, Better Choices Court is for individuals who have not been sentenced. In Sacramento and Fresno, these courts were established in 2010. There's usually between 6 to 12 participants. Currently, we have 8 in Fresno and 2 in Sacramento. Unlike the other courts where the judge is seated together with the team in court, in Better Choices Court, the judge remains on the bench and the respective team members are seated in their normal positions as they would be during trial. Goals are still set and expected to be accomplished. And upon successful completion of this program, participants may receive a reduced sentence or reduced prison time. I believe the best part of this court is the huge change that occurs in each participant. Participants typically enter the court downcast, holding no job, and very much feeling like a failure, looking forward only to prison time. By the end of the year, the participants have confidence in themselves. They have a job and a complete attitude change. They're still looking forward to prison time, but they're looking forward to it sober with the regained support of family and friends. For myself, I assist participants in achieving their goals. I've created resumes, developed budgets, navigated government agencies, and find information. Possibly the best thing I routinely do is just make a phone call to follow up and encourage the participants. Because, as we all know, life is messy and busy, and it is so easy to just stay stuck in trying to survive rather than reaching and accomplishing our goals. I work with the Federal Defender's Office social worker who works even more closely with the participant, sometimes providing transportation and even daily check-ins. It's easy to cite examples of how specialty court team members have assisted the participants. Definitely a beneficial resource. One of my favorite examples was meeting a participant in the treatment provider's office last summer for a practice interview. The reentry court team had told the participant to find a job, and the participant completed a program at the local workforce office, which led him to apprenticeship programs with various unions. He had taken several tests and was now scheduled for a panel interview. Myself and the counselor both pretended to be on a panel interviewing our participant. We were able to talk him through his anxiety and give him pointers for the interview. Although he did not get his first choice, electrical union, he did get his next choice, sheet metal. I believe this is the first time this participant experienced people helping him to achieve his goals. And of course, the probation officer was willing to contact the employer and explain the benefits of hiring someone who is on probation, to include drug testing, house visits and calls from the probation officer, mentoring and counseling services, not to mention the accountability provided by specialty courts. Speaking of federal probation officers, they are all over the country, and they are accessible, and they work tirelessly to assist with the needs of people who have released from prison. Many offices provide locations for job searching and refer to treatment or counseling for minimal or no fee. Probation officers also stay connected to specialty courts and resources in the community. Many offices organize events monthly or quarterly for those people newly released from prison to meet with community service providers and even hear the testimonies of people who once walked in their shoes. And speaking of passionate people who have walked in those shoes, I'd like to mention another resource, the local Reentry Collaboratives that are taking place all over the nation. Here in the Eastern District of California, I'd like to mention three: the Sacramento Area Reentry Network, Fresno Hope Coalition, or Helping Other People Evolve Coalition, and the Bakersfield Safe Streets Partnership. The Sacramento Area Reentry Network was recently formed and is organized by the Federal Defender's Office social worker. The mission is to connect and empower reentry advocates and providers through networking, education, and sharing of resources. Monthly networking meetings are held where attendees have the opportunity to engage with other providers and advocates through the agency presentations, maybe tours, and lots of discussions and networking. There are hundreds of people who have joined the network and share information, not only at the monthly meetings, but daily via email and website message board, often working together to assist specific individuals. This collaborative believes that we are all empowered when we support one another's efforts in reducing recidivism in our region. In Fresno and Bakersfield, cops, clergy, and community come together to address gang and gun violence in neighborhoods by using credible messengers, individuals who typically have felony convictions in their past, but have become model citizens and want to help others to get out of the gang lifestyle. These credible messengers reach out to victims and the shooters, sometimes one person is both, through mentoring, utilizing community resources, and also through neighborhood block parties. At block parties, community providers set up booths to offer the resources, from education to health resources. Groceries are given away, bicycles for kids are given away, and free food and entertainment are provided. The locations of these block parties are typically where a shooting occurred, and the residents may be fearful to come out of their houses. The block party works to bring the neighborhood together. These groups also organize special events like back to school backpack giveaways, Christmas presents, and Easter baskets, and events at the local schools, from internet safety to drug prevention, education for parents. They also organize Stop the Violence walks and marches. The Bakersfield Safe Streets Partnership is very similar to the Hope Coalition, except that in Bakersfield, there are also quarterly call-ins. This is where known gang members, typically on probation, are asked to come to a short program located at a church or a community center, where cops, clergy, and community members provide a meal and boldly share their resources and testimonies. Law enforcement explains the consequences of continued gang involvement and violence. Communities share their stories about the loss of a loved one to gang violence. And community providers share the resources that they have to offer, from education to jobs to reduced child support payments. After the event, those participants who wish to share their information are contacted with follow-up resources, to include mentoring. Since 2017, I have personally attended 5 call-ins from the West Side to the East Side. there have been 56 participants, and many were open to resources. Of course, the more participants deciding to leave the gang violence behind and pursue assistance into a law-abiding path, the better. But if just one person makes that change, it can have an enormous ripple effect and decrease the amount of shootings and gang violence that are occurring in a neighborhood. Call-ins occur around the nation, and on the East Coast, research has been completed proving the program to be a best practice. Two of the programs I've mentioned have relied on grants to get started and now are maintaining on their own. So I'd like to take a minute to mention a small bit about federal grants. There are new grants and a payment management system coming in October 2020. You can find information on the Bureau of Justice Assistance, BJA, Office of Justice Programs, OJP, website at www.ojp.gov/funding. This site also has information about the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, OJJDP. In 2019, OJJDP awarded $323,477,998 in grants to support programs, research, training, and technical assistance, and information dissemination activities. Lastly, I'd like to mention the Community-Oriented Policing Services, COPS, at cops.usdoj.gov/grants. You can explore funding opportunities through COPS if you're a local, state, tribal, or territorial law enforcement agency. And some grant programs are available to non-law enforcement agencies. This office was established in 1994 and has invested over $14 billion in community policing. So, in my opinion, these teams and collaboratives of people offer the greatest resources and innovative strategies for creating positive outcomes in historically underserved communities, especially when the collaborative has a specific goal and dedicated people looking to achieve that goal. Which leads me to our recently convened meeting that we called RAMP, the Sacramento Promise Zone Reentry Asset Mapping Project, which Greg also described and I wanted to follow up on. The main focus of this convening is to get housing for those individuals coming out of prison via a halfway house, which in federal terms is called a residential reentry center, or RRC. At the RRC, an individual has a place to get their needs met, a place to sleep, food, clothing, assistance with transportation, even on-site counselors and job developers. You may be thinking, that sounds good, a residential reentry center. So let me ask, how about in your community? Would you be willing to advocate for an RRC? Maybe you might be thinking, not in my backyard. This has definitely been the challenge in Sacramento, California. What you haven't realized though, is that individuals are coming out of prison into your community, whether you like it or not. Nationwide, there are 122 federal prisons. In California, there are 10 federal prisons, and 4 of these are in the Eastern District of California. In 2019, I looked at the numbers of federal inmates re-entering our communities. There are no less than 235 inmates re-entering California every month. Imagine 235 people with needs arriving at bus stops in communities every month. Some have loved ones waiting for them, and some do not. but they all have needs. Wouldn't you rather have an individual arrive at an RRC rather than walk into your community with nothing but needs? Sure, there are some other programs besides RRCs that we could consider. HUD could provide housing vouchers that would require allocating a certain percent of housing vouchers specifically to individuals releasing from prison. We all know that HUD has a very long waiting list of community members. Then there's the Homecoming Project I recently learned about. Basically, an individual would rent a room from a family. The family may be even next door to you. But here's a project working around the restrictions of communities' attitudes and perceptions. I certainly would rather see individuals coming out of prison go straight to an RRC. At RRCs, the participant has the opportunity to slowly reintegrate into the community. They can look for jobs during the day, they can do volunteer work, learn how cell phones work, or visit with family weekly to learn how to resolve conflict. To fellow participants about what life is like outside of prison. There are evidence-based programs that utilize cognitive behavioral therapy and licensed professionals in the fields of substance use, family reunification, employment, education, and mental health. According to the National Reentry Resource Center website, the more regularly individuals receive pro-social services, the greater their chance for success, especially for those with a high risk of recidivating. And RRCs are for participants in specialty courts too. Because we all know that life throws us surprises and things don't always go as planned. This is true whether you have a felony conviction or not. The RRC allows for a participant to be placed there temporarily to reset or refocus rather than being returned to prison. Maybe there was a relapse in a substance. The individual can work with a counselor to figure out what happened and how to make better future decisions while still keeping his or her job and possible family ties. I hope our presentation has provided an overview of the different reentry resources and the importance of RRCs. I know in the Eastern District of California, we use specialty courts and collaboratives, and we're hoping to also have RRCs to create positive outcomes. Finally, I want to end by talking about the U.S. Attorney's Office's work in prevention. The work of preventing crime is just as important as reentry, and there are best practices and innovative strategies to create positive outcomes in historically underserved communities through prevention. Some of the work that my heart has sought after is with the children of incarcerated parents. I have been blessed to collaborate with a school site that offers support groups to their students. A position similar to school counselor and myself meet each semester to offer an 8-week support group for students who have an incarcerated family member. These high school students typically have not processed through the feelings of having an incarcerated loved one, and the support group allows them to share with other students that are in similar situations. In one group, we were even able to FaceTime with a student in San Francisco who is a part of Project What. This student has experience sharing her testimony because Project What offers summer classes for children of incarcerated parents that teaches children to write out and speak about their experience. Her testimony is powerful and it empowers other students to have the confidence to share about their own experience. But most of my inspiration has come from pain of the prison system, or POPS, the club, that offers weekly lunch meetings on high school campuses in Southern California. They too write about their experiences and publish a book each year. I also must mention the work that Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, California is doing with their one-day program called RISE, Reaching Youth, Saving and Empowering. Trained female inmate facilitators present, mentor, and counsel on drugs, violence, gangs, and self-confidence to junior and high school female students. The students and the inmates are paired and usually connect immediately because these inmates have walked in the shoes of these students. So finally, my most recent collaboration is where I've merged all my experience together. Working with the Reentry Affairs Coordinator in the Federal Bureau of Prisons at the institution in Mendota, California, we were going to facilitate a group for inmates preparing for release, utilizing the curriculum titled Thinking for a Change through the National Institute of Corrections. In fact, we were expected to begin the group in March 2020, which has now been delayed. Known as T4C, this evidence-based program is a cognitive behavior change program that incorporates research from cognitive restructuring theory, social skills development, and the learning and use of problem-solving skills. There are about 25 lessons with homework assignments in between. The curriculum works to address the cognitive, social, and emotional needs of people currently incarcerated. My favorite part, though, is that it's being facilitated by two people whose job titles include the words reentry. So I'm looking forward to beginning this group and preparing people for their reentry into the community. Our office also does community outreach in the effort to prevent hate crimes, drug overdoses, particularly related to the opioid epidemic, and encourage civic engagement. Many of our assistant U.S. attorneys participate in classroom presentations and mock trial events. Our attorneys are passionate about their work in prosecution and protecting the community, and just as passionate in creating positive outcomes in historically underserved communities. As Greg mentioned, the anti-violence strategy of the U.S. Attorney's Office is threefold: prevention, enforcement, and reentry. And in my opinion, the greatest resource that we have for best practices and innovative strategies to create positive outcomes in historically underserved communities is each other. I hope that I've inspired you to think about the teams of people that you can join and the collaborations of people that you can work with. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this convening, where I know I am talking to a group of individuals who have the power to effect change.
Jennifer, thank you very much. That was terrific. And I want to just provide a few closing words on how to try to make this happen. And then we'd love to take your questions. So I did see one of the questions that came in on the text was, who funds these RRCs? And the answer, let me just explain a little bit about that. They are completely 100% funded by the U.S. Bureau of Prisons. And the process is the Bureau of Prisons will let a contract bidding process in a particular location, and then lock, stock, and barrel, the winner of the contract operates the facility, but it is completely funded by the U.S. Bureau of Prisons. As I mentioned earlier, as a result of the First Step Act and other things, there's a lot of money at BOP right now and a lot of emphasis on the RRCs. Historically, as Jennifer mentioned, we have encountered the NIMBY concept here in Sacramento, and that has effectively blocked us on many efforts over the years to try to cite an RRC. Last year, we held multiple meetings. Silas and Michael were in attendance. We had our Promise Zone coordinator, I'm not sure if that's his exact title, but the head person for our Promise Zone here in Sacramento. We had the HUD regional administrator. We had the HHS regional administrator, the mayor's office, city council members, the local district attorney, all around the table saying, how do we make this work? And at the end of the day, what we were able to do was show the benefit of this to one of our Sacramento City Council members in particular. And Jennifer talked about, these people are being released every day. Every day, people are coming out of the federal prisons and coming back to our neighborhoods. And either we can try to figure out a way to help them as best we can to transition back, to arm them with the basic tools, as I mentioned earlier, a driver's license, a GED, the simple things that all of us take for granted, or we consign them to the likelihood that they're going to reoffend and they're going to go back. And the option there seems very clear to me. Now, another piece of this is working in conjunction with the Promise Zone and frankly, the tax benefits and the other things that derive from this. There's an economic benefit to a community because there's going to be an infusion of federal dollars into this location. And that can come in people who work there, from the janitor to the service provider. And so you have an economic infusion as well. So we have the contract in Sacramento has been let. We are waiting for it to close on the bids. We have reason for optimism that that's going to take place. And in terms of, how do I try to make this happen in my community? I encourage you to seek out your United States attorney, because we all have been given a clear mandate that this is something we need to fully support and try to make happen in our communities. And then we have the contacts. Because of our involvement in it, I was able to reach out directly to the Federal Bureau of Prisons and identify the person there in Washington, D.C. at headquarters who is responsible for RRC programs across the nation. He has traveled out here twice, obviously pre-COVID, but he came out here twice for our meetings. So we're talking to the guy who manages this program for the Bureau of Prisons and to get his buy-in to what we're trying to do here in Sacramento. So I know we're running short on time, but I want to thank you all very much for listening to our presentation today. As Jennifer said, it is something we believe passionately in. And I can tell you that, my many years of doing prosecution work, we've got to find a better way. And I think many of the things that Jennifer described here today are that better way. So thank you. Michael, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, McGregor and Jennifer. I know that, and I can see, as you can see in the chat, the people are really getting this and seeing that this is something that it's a scalable, replicatable programs, but it's something that is impacting the entire nation. Every area, every sector is dealing with this. So I want to try to jump to a couple of questions. Let's see, the first one, I think you covered the one about, did you cover how the specialty courts are funded?
Jennifer, do you want to speak to that?
I know in our district, we have specific judges who have taken on that role. They wanted a wellness court to happen, and they pulled the people together and made that happen, as well as the reentry courts and the better choices courts. I know the judges were really the driving force.
Yeah, and let me just add to that very quickly. The bottom line is that when the judges express an interest and they want to cause something to happen, they have the ability to convene all the involved parties. And so our local probation office, essentially, this is a slight overstatement. They don't have any choice if the judge wants them to be there and be part of this. And so they're going to be there. Our federal defender's office, to their great credit, in my opinion, found some money in their budget, and they were able to essentially hire a social worker to help them manage the caseload of these people in these various courts. So I don't know that there's any special funding out there. I think all of us, my lawyers are participants in all of these various courts that Jennifer described, but we're all kind of taking it out of HUD because we think it's that important and it's something that we need to do.
Great. I'm going to highlight one other question. It's related to, the question is, are grants focused on prevention awarded to more applicants that have higher rates of violence, crimes in their city or area? And I'm sorry, there's a follow-up. If so, what can be done for applicants that are from cities with lower rates of violent crimes than larger urban areas? Let's say examples of rural or tribal to be able to be competitive.
So let me take that from the RRC end of it. And then Jennifer, maybe you could talk a little bit more at the local level specifically about the different things that we're doing there. So I don't think this is an overstatement in any way, shape, or form. I think BOP is motivated and has the money to cite RRCs across this nation. And I don't know that there's really any disqualifier that a particular location has a lower crime rate than another, or maybe more thinly populated. But so it's just a matter of getting in the game and submitting an application, getting the buy-in from the right people in your specific community. And I would say too, RRCs are going to typically be cited in the big cities in a particular area, but that's not to say that, as is mentioned specifically with the tribal, that the tribal areas are a sweet spot for what all of us are trying to do here. So there would be a great motivation and incentive to try to cite them in those locations as well. Jennifer?
So I had mentioned 2 of our programs began with grants, and I know that Hope Coalition in Fresno was a local grant through the Fresno Police Department, and it has since run out, and they have been able to just maintain pretty much through all of the nonprofits and the attendees, just kind of chipping in and picking up the different pieces that need to occur to keep this Hope Coalition going. And also the Bakersfield Safe Streets Partnership received a grant, a federal grant, and it has also since run out. And again, everyone is chipping in and keeping it going. Hopefully, when I was doing my presentation, you wrote down those websites for OJP and COPS, because they're constantly putting up different federal grants, and you just have to kind of go through and read which ones apply to you, which ones don't, which areas that you're interested in. There's just a lot of different topics and information, various grants to go after.
And if I could, Michael, I'm not sure how we're doing on time here, but on the grant piece of it, on the federal grant piece of it, each United States Attorney's Office has a position called the Law Enforcement Coordinator, and LEC is what we call them. And those persons, every time COPS or OJP rolls out a new grant program, those go directly to our law enforcement coordinators. And my person, for example, will go through them and okay, well, maybe here's one that might fit with that organization or this need. And then, so we try to parse it that way. So again, I would encourage you to be in contact with your U.S. Attorney's Office and try to figure out how to get in that parsing that goes on to try to help organizations, because we've done that very extensively here in the Eastern District. Somebody has a need, we become aware of a grant, we try to match those things up.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much. We are pushing right up on the time, so I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I'm sure everybody could stay for a lot longer, but there are probably other pressing things. McGregor and Jennifer, thank you so much for the information you've shared. It's like I mentioned earlier, it's something that is a picture that provides hope, I guess, across the country and access to the resources and kind of a template for what can be done. So really appreciate that. And we have some information in the chat we will provide to all the participants if they want to follow up on more information. But thank you once again, and I'll turn it back to Silas.
Thank you all to all the presenters today. We really enjoyed the information that you shared. Tremendous amount of information that'll help across the board. Again, thank you for taking time out today to participate in our 2020 Federal Convening. I really enjoyed the information as well as our presenters. We want to go ahead and conclude with our 2020 Federal Promise Zone Convening. We look forward to getting feedback. We also look forward to presenting again in the next year or so. So be looking for us to continue to move forward. Be looking to connect with you across the boards. Please connect with your promise zones. If you're in a promise zone, please connect to them. Connect to their CLs, to the coordinators. Let's make sure that we're getting the word across and continue to build the partnerships across the board. With that being said, we thank you and we look forward to chatting with you again. Thank you for attending this year's 2020.
Thank you very much.